First day of May. How you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well. Thank you very much. It is Macro Monday, May 1st, on the flight path. And here we are on the heels of
Freshly,
consensus.
freshly back. Yeah, freshly back. It's nice to come home. I came home yesterday, with the idea that I was gonna get organized and ready for the week, and I did that. I just did a bunch of it this morning when I woke up. So, you know how
Time
it
is a
is.
flat circle, it's an illusion.
That's right. That's right. But overall, it was great, man. It was awesome. Great to be on the ground, and met a bunch of interesting people. My key takeaway from this kind of stuff is it's definitely worth going and talking to people. You find out who's at what hotels, like where people are gathering, where the events are. Do that. I don't know that I would pay for a ticket to walk around the convention.
Hmm.
uh, I don't know that that's necessarily worth it. At least in my mind, those tickets were like 2 grand. We ended up getting one for free, but like I'd much rather invest the 2 grand into crypto. But that being said, being around people in the industry and just talking to people is definitely worth going. I mean, if you can figure out a way that isn't going to cost you a fortune between hotels and conference tickets and all that stuff, it's definitely valuable to be on the ground because most of what we do is buy a computer. We're usually by ourselves, and it's great to get involved in crypto in that aspect. So I'd like to do more of that. uh, but that's my general takeaway. But overall, very exciting, very cool, definitely a great experience.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting time coming off the heels of this lockdown BS for however many years that now that we've been had this wet blanket on our psyches more than anything else. So it's an interesting way to like feel like we're reemerging or re-entering the social, like the physical world after spending so much time. And this isn't just me, or this is anecdotal, of course, but if you look at like share prices of Amazon and Google and all of the things that benefited from people spending way more time than they like did on average in front of their devices, their computers, on the internet, buying stuff. Like that energy had to find a place to go, and it went into buying stuff. You know, I'm not immune to any of this by any stretch. I'm on the ride with everyone else. The point I'm trying to get to is that I think it's very interesting to, and I'm doing this in my own world too. I'm going to go to a thing in Atlanta in June, and I want to start getting out. And, like just on Friday, I went and met with a friend over near the beach, and it's 70 miles to get there. And I did the drive. It was no big whoop. But the point is, somebody asked me. I ran into somebody else that I hadn't seen in probably 2 years, just at coffee shop. It just like happened to be there. It was great. And he asked me what the hell. He's like, "What the hell are you doing over here?" And I said, "Man, sometimes you got to press the flesh." And that was really where I was trying to communicate. Is that this? You hear politicians talk about getting out and pressing the flesh. Shaking hands, looking people in the eye, and being being in front of people is there's still that still matters. I think. I mean, maybe I'm weird, but I
Well,
think that
it
does matter.
does. Yeah, no, and it does. And I think there's interesting things happening in crypto around community building that uh, kind of merge the two, right? And there's a lot of interesting dynamics at play with crypto and pseudo anonymity and 100% anonymity, but you can still form a community online. And one of the most interesting speakers that I listened to was Balaji, and he was the author of The Network State. And I talk about him and his ideas a lot because I find them interesting. But that's something that the network state, in combination with crypto, is kind of bridging that gap because there's always going to be a human need to have community and network and communicate. And so while getting in front of people is very, very important, I think there's ways to kind of have a hybrid of that, right? And not just in the crypto world, but with any kind of community. So very important stuff.
One last thing on that topic.
Yeah.
We'll rewind the tape in history real quick. It's not really that much different. We have new and exciting ways to do the thing you're talking about. But just imagine the world before the telephone, or like this ability to pick up the phone and call someone on the other side of the country, or like down the street even. It used to be if I wanted to know where my friends were when I was a kid, I'd have to get up off my butt and walk out the front door and go look for them. Like there was no way to, like, using the electromagnetic spectrum to send some waves across space and time and ping them in a manner of speaking. And hold on, I got to sneeze. So
Bless you.
excuse me. Thank you. The point I was trying to get to is that our like our worlds were smaller in the old days, and then the telephone came along and it started to get a little bit bigger. And so there's this, like, what I'm trying to get to is that we have these really new and exciting and interesting ways of, like, what we're doing right now. We're thousands of, like probably what, 1,100 miles between us or something like that physically, yet we're communicating in near real time, and there's, faces are able to see each other, all this great stuff. But the point is that the hybrid model or this hybrid of online communities, real world communities, continues to shape and evolve based on the available technology, and more importantly, people's reaction to it and their interest and level of uptake or consumption, meaning, and just like where we're putting our energy and effort. And it's anyway, I was just trying to help, like, reinforce the ideas that you're talking about.
Well, yeah, no, for sure. And another interesting thing I was reminded over the weekend, and I tweeted this. When you're in front of somebody or you're talking to somebody, like especially someone new, in my experience, what I found is the people you can trust are able to take very complex ideas and topics and make them simple, right? And so a lot of times when especially when somebody's trying to sell you something, like if somebody's talking really fast and using long, complicated words that don't need to be used, that's usually a tell. And when you're in person, it's a lot easier to suss a lot of that out. And I've learned this the hard way, by the way, right? Because you have people that all these people say are, this guy's really smart, blah 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 blah, and then you meet that person and it's like, all right, like I have no idea what he just said, and it's not because I just walked off the turnip truck, right? Like, so it's interesting. That's something you can only really do in person. But that's I thought that was funny because as we're online and we read a lot of stuff on Twitter, and you're considering like which crypto coins to buy or not buy, a lot of times it would be beneficial to meet the team behind it, right, and get an understanding of who's doing this. And I think that's important as we continue down our crypto journeys to kind of place that in our tool bag of things we should do and consider before investing a lot of money in this. And this is something that, like, I've not really done a great job of, because you just say, okay, well, the market's good, I'm gonna buy Polkadot, right? But if you could put yourself in the shoes of someone who really invests, they're not going to invest unless they know the team and what their actual objective is. So I think the same thing applies to crypto. Just an interesting observation and thought. And as I relate to my own experience, I wrote down that I really need to do a better job of that in my own investing. But anyway, let's get into the crypto markets. Looks like Bitcoin's dropped a little bit. It's at 28,500. It's kind of ranging. Ethereum's down a little bit too. We can pull up a chart real quick. This might take a second to load because I've been gone for a little bit. Let's see here.
Yeah, interesting. Like, I think arranging is the right word. There seems to be this expectation that this thing's just going to rocket to the moon, and like I think it's Andrew Kang on Twitter says that these things, markets don't move in straight lines. Like, and this what we're looking at right now, this doesn't illustrate, like, pretty clearly that that we are in a range, and that there's clear demand at the lower end of the range, and very clearly supply at the top end of the range. So there's and the other thing I'm trying to communicate right now is that in the short term, like, depending on your perspective and your approach, if you're a short-term trader and you're just trying to find interesting opportunities to pick up an asset at one price and sell it at another and ideally make a profit, or take a small loss and move on to the next opportunity. This has been very challenging. And I think what's happening, like my opinion of what we see here is that the supply and demand zones are like pretty well articulated or pretty well illustrated. And the market in general is kind of waiting, like we're holding our breath in a minute, like waiting to exhale is probably not the greatest analogy, but everybody's kind of like, I want this thing to moon, or if your bias is to the downside, you're like, I want this thing to crap out so I can either buy more or cover my short position. I mean, everyone's bias is different because we're all different as people. The point I'm really trying to get to here is that depending on your time horizon and a few other things, you see the price action is telling a story, and the story is that it could go lower, but it hasn't, and it could go higher, but it also hasn't. So what do we have on tap this week, I think, is probably
that's
a big contributor.
Great transition into the macro stuff that, we always love to talk about, that, like you said, everybody's just kind of waiting. We've got a few things
Key
happening
things
this week.
today are, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No,
the ISM, the old Raoul Pal on Twitter, I encourage anyone who's interested in learning more, whether you'll whether Raoul Pal is an acquired taste to some. So take what he says with a grain of salt, but the gist is that there's the ISM is an important thing. Okay, you don't have to know what it is necessarily. Just understand that this ISM thing, when it gets reported, there are people that are waiting to see what the tea leaves are going to tell them, and everyone's going to perceive it a little bit differently. Just keep these things in mind. So today, we have the ISM dropping in like 17 minutes or something like that. Compared to where we are right now, it's about a quarter of 9 a.m. Eastern. And then the other, the most important thing that happens is on Wednesday is FOMC. And what I don't understand, or what I don't like, is I don't like if you've been watching things on Twitter, or if, depending on where you get your news and how much attention are you paying, there's a tendency for these things there's a tendency for market participants to get really hung up, in a manner of speaking, on these news releases. And the most important one this week that I'm trying to spit out is that FOMC is going to they're going to publish another decision around what the interest rate is going to be. And I think one of two things is going to happen. I mean, it's not really rocket science. Either they're going to raise the 25 basis points, which is consensus, and as is articulated here in the consensus column, is that the market seems to be pricing in a manner of speaking, that there will be another 25 basis point hike. There was some FUD or some weirdness on Twitter that Jerome Powell was giving a phone interview or a Zoom interview or some sort of interview with who they, and I'll take this is just me repeating what I think I understand, and I don't know, and I don't necessarily trust it, but allegedly some prank callers were pretending to be Zelensky, and he was talking with them, what he thought was Zelensky, and then basically let it out of the bag that there would be this week there would be a hike of 25 basis points from 5 to 5.25, and that there would be one more hike at the next round. And remember, take everything you read on the internet with a grain of salt. I don't know that what was being paraded around as information was really necessary, but I think it's probably very likely that we do get the 25 basis point hike. And I think the Fed is doing the things that they think they need to do to set themselves up to do the things that they're going to need to do later if we do in fact get a big change in how things are happening. And I mean, in terms of the potential for actual deep recession, I don't know that we're there yet. I know that there's been some talking heads about it, but the most important item coming down the pipe this week is this rate decision but I think everyone's expecting a 25 basis point hike, and I think that it would be a huge surprise, quite frankly, from my like from where I sit, it would be a big surprise if they paused. And I think that's the thing I'm trying to communicate and wrap it up here on this FOMC business is simply they either are going to hike, which I think is what they're going to do, or they're going to pause. I think that it's less likely that they pause because a pause in my experience and many others, I'm just repeating half of what I have experienced myself and the other half of what I've seen other people talk about, is that a pause is effectively as good as a cut when you're in the middle of a hiking cycle. So all I'm trying to communicate here is that I think people are paying attention, they're waiting, they're trying to understand like what it's going to be like for the next several months in economic terms. Like, what are the headwinds? Basically, what are the headwinds going to be? Are there any tailwinds? Is credit going to get really tight? And I think it is tightening a little bit. But is it going to become systemically a problem for businesses, bigger companies, and much more importantly, smaller business to have access to credit to get over any short-term economic challenge in terms of like being able to make payroll and things like that? I mean, it's serious business, this idea of credit, and that's really what I'm trying to like the underlying thread here is that access to credit and any sort of credit crunch, which this banking crisis business is not helping, quite frankly. And
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
go
Sorry.
ahead.
No. I was just going to say, what's amazing about that interaction between Jerome Powell and Zelensky, assuming it's real, or the fake Zelensky, is that happened to Christine Lagarde, who's the head of the ECB, and this information is supposed to be extremely guarded. No one's supposed to know what, Powell's going to do with interest rate hikes. But what it shows you is that if it's real, there are people that have information before the decision is released. And I don't even know if that's legal. I just don't know. But, the other thing is, how can they be so dumb to get conned by this? Like, that's a big deal. And if he's relaying this sort of information and it's not even to, that's scary. I mean, it really is. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Like,
I'll support the thesis here is that in my whole experience, going back to 2014, and this idea of these things, these news slash economic indicator releases, it was like waiting for lottery numbers in market terms. Okay, and the understanding that I developed was that somebody knew ahead of time, obviously, what it was going to be, but the incentive, what I'm trying to communicate is that I agree that this sort of information, you got to understand, is that the entire world depends to a certain extent on what the rate is and whether or not the Fed is going to change it, because the ripple effects it's really hard to understand as a normie. Like, it's hard for us to get our heads around it. But once you start doing so, you understand that they can't, or they can do a lot. They can change the rate if they wanted to any day, any time, and then announce it. But the point I'm trying to support here is that it's disturbing to me that Powell would talk about this outside of when they're supposed to be able to talk about this. And how is this not a problem?
Exactly. That's exactly it. Like, why is this this is okay, I guess. This is here's the thing. Like, okay, as a normal trader, say this is true and this, or, what do you do then? Okay, there's two different levels of, issues there. How do you act on information that you have? Like, say that is true. The other thing you don't know is, is this a psyop, right? Is this this intentionally put out there, to throw people off? Who knows? But, anyway, we could talk about that all day. I wanted to also transition here into some of the things that happened over the weekend. First Republic Bank, you've got Charlie Balilo posting here. He's a good follow. He's got a lot of data on everything, right? And so he posted First Republic Bank was the second largest bank failure in the U.S. history. Only Washington Mutual was bigger. And that's a
Wow.
huge deal. Following that, we've got guess who stepped in to buy it? J.P. Morgan, which is interesting because the Feds talked about rescuing the bank, quote unquote rescue, bailout, whatever, and they fumbled it, and in steps J.P. Morgan to pick up the pieces. So this is interesting because of the idea that you're getting consolidation from in the banking industry to the top banks, and you could speculate as to why that would potentially be a problem. Mainly that what people are thinking is that the consolidation to big banks will continue in order to allow for a CBDC to be pushed into the market. I don't know, Ted. What do you think?
The question I have is how long now until the banking system becomes nationalized here in the U.S. The land of the free, home of the brave, the free enterprise system, free markets, wrong. This is like how long before these bigger banks get so big that they effectively become a proxy for the government. You understand what I'm saying there?
Well, I do, and this idea of nationalism, I think the words that we used to use to describe these things don't have the same meanings anymore, because what we have that exists today is we do have a government slash corporate, ownership of most of the things in the, most of the assets, right? Like, you call it whatever you want. I don't know what word to use for it, but that they're already working together, right? And in a big way. And I listened to a bunch of podcasts over the weekend, but the one that I can't remember where it came from, the guy was essentially saying that, look, you're looking at the world the way it used to exist 20 years ago, where private companies existed to make money. That world in the current system that we live in no longer exists. These companies' objectives are different, and they're different because they're being merged with government, right? And so where you have some of these companies that come out and do crazy things like completely alienate their market, their patrons and their consumers to push some sort of government sponsored message, you're going, why would they do that? They're going to lose all their money. Well, like take shares of Fox News, for instance. They fired Tucker Carlson, who, like him or love him, like him or hate him, he was their number one guy. Okay, well, you find out that BlackRock owns 15 point some percent of Fox News Corporation. And so, it's not necessarily a money decision. It's because, again, this all goes back to, it all circles around to Bitcoin and crypto, because these people have unlimited money, to push their messages. They don't care if people stop watching Fox News altogether. They're just going to prop up a zombie company with newly printed dollars that come out of these. It's insane. So their objective, where we look at it and we say, okay, that's a stupid decision because it's going to cost them a lot of money. Well, they don't necessarily care, right? They're not so much concerned about making money as they are about pushing their message across, right? And they're propped up by essentially factions of the government.
Yeah, it's okay for speaking. We talk about time horizons a lot in the crypto space. Like, oh, if your time horizon is more than 4 years, then anyone who buys Bitcoin makes money. Blah blah blah. Like when you have like billions and billions of dollars worth of investments, your time horizons are not today or even years. They're like decades long. Okay, I think BlackRock wants to be around for another 150 or 200 years. So they're thinking in terms of, like, if the hatchet has to fall, in my opinion, the hatchet has to fall today on Fox News, so be it, because every other investment and every other they've got tentacles. I'm not saying this to be like disparaging, like if you want to grow a business and survive, like they're just trying to survive. Take all of the stuff out of the other nastiness out of the equation for a second. the big banks are the same way. They're trying to find ways to survive, and the too big to fail is a label on something that just found a way to like have one significant failure in one part of their business, and the other parts of their business are able to absorb that burden, in a manner of speaking, financially. So, the point I'm trying to get to is that the BlackRocks will act this way because they're looking further out and they have different plans, and that's okay for something like something as prominent, in a manner of speaking, in my just my opinion. Something like a Fox News can be seen to collapse to a certain extent, but it's really good cover for doing a lot of other interesting things when you're running a big business like that. You get to clear out a bunch of old things that didn't work, that weren't working perhaps, or you just get to like get rid of a bunch of headcount and start rebuilding it for some other objective perhaps. I mean, these are things that these things just happen. I'm not that creative. Like I don't
Well, no, but
I'm not a
the
fantasy writer.
point.
This is stuff happening.
Yeah, and the issue though is, okay, fine, whatever with what you just said, but okay, why come in and then, fire your number one host? Like, if you're trying to survive, quote unquote, and maybe what they see coming is an agenda that they either need to be a part of or they won't survive, right? Maybe that's how they look at it, and so that's why. And again, what I'm saying is speculative. I don't know. It just seems
Yeah.
it just seems very strange to me that these things are happening in the way they're happening. And as far as First Republic, I think it's interesting that bank failed. If you talk to Elizabeth Warren, I don't believe they were involved with crypto in any way. How does a bank fail if it's not involved in crypto? I don't know. Like, it's just stupid, right? Like, these issues are much larger than what we see being reported, and I think it's important to put into context of crypto. And what I was saying with the way the world works today, with these companies that are close to the money printer and close to the government, and they can push agendas whether you agree with them or not. That in a world that Bitcoin world, that can't happen because they can't print unlimited money, right? To push messages that may or may not resonate with people, right? This is something that's very important about Bitcoin specifically, that a lot of people in the industry really, really believe in, and it's about more than money, right? Because if you live in a Bitcoin standard, these kind of actions aren't possible to a certain extent.
That's right. The last thing I want to say about this Fox News thing, or the machinations behind the scenes, I think, like there's a good saying that says, never let a good crisis go to waste, and that even in a crisis scenario, the amount of PR that you get, there's not enough money on earth to have facilitated a PR campaign that could have gotten the kind of exposure that you get from firing Tucker Carlson and having millions of people have the brand Fox News. Same thing with Anheuser-Busch and this Bud Light fiasco. All that happened, quite frankly, is that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people turned around and told somebody else and said the words, Bud Light this, Bud Light that. That's what the subconscious hears, is they got brand exposure, and you can't unhear the words. Once you've heard them, you can't unhear it. So talk about a psyop, man. It was on the lips of millions. And if Anheuser-Busch had thought, wait a minute, instead of doing all this other stuff that we could get all this free press, why don't we try and hire a PR firm and try to do it in another way? There's not enough money. They would have had to liquidate things and stuff, and it would have been cost them hundreds of billions of dollars to get the kind of exposure that they got for next to nothing. And call me a conspiracy theorist, I think that people are smart enough to understand, like politicians know this. When they want the public to do something, they say the opposite. We're gonna ban assault rifles, and what happens? People get up off their lazy butts and they go and they buy one. I don't make
Yeah,
the
no,
rules.
no, no, no. It's sad though that to think that it's the way it is. And they might have been saying Bud Light, but they weren't drinking it. At least not the past couple weeks. But I don't think it's going to be a permanent thing.
It never is, man. It
Yeah,
never
no,
is.
but anyway, yeah, all this stuff is similar vein. It's happening across multiple industries, and you just start to notice it after a while. And the reason it matters, right? We're talking macro, and trying to weave everything together because it does all come together, right? Like and
Hmm.
crypto and Bitcoin will play a part in all of this moving forward. And so I think what we'll see is people will eventually get tired of being manipulated constantly, right? And they'll just say, look, I don't want to be a part of this system anymore. What are my alternatives? And there's a great alternative in Bitcoin and crypto right in front of them. So
Hmm.
that being said, I think what we got to watch out for this week is obviously Wednesday, the FOMC meeting. Maybe we'll get some more video from Powell talking to fake Vladimir Putin. Who knows?
Yeah.
Shed some more light on what he's going to say before he says it. But um, that's all we have for today. Sounds good. As always, this isn't financial advice. Do your own research. Make sure that whenever you enter these markets, you've done